Georgia Widman, speaking us on security in coronavirus. Over to you, ma'am.
Hi, CIA conference. It's Georgia Weedman here from the United States, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about security in the time of COVID-19. Mobile security comes home, as I call it, but really, this isn't anything particularly different because this is the same sort of stuff that I've been talking about for a really long time. It's just the world is, shall we say, kind of waking up to the issues that have been issues for 20 years at least, ever since people started using their own devices, ever since mobile devices came around. Then we got IoT and all sorts of cloud apps and, all the things that we use to be productive. It just suddenly became, I guess, the only way that people were able to be productive when they had to stay home. So people started perhaps to think about the security of them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. It is kind of going to be US centric since that's where I am. And while typically I travel a lot, I have not been able to travel this year at all, really. I came back, I went to New Zealand, and then I went to the RSA conference in San Francisco, and then I went home, and then we were locked down, and I've not traveled since then. So I'm sure things are somewhat similar, somewhat different in your own environments, but regardless, we can hopefully take some things away from this that you can, bring to your own understanding of security and the security of your own enterprise and your own home, because now more than ever, the security of your own home, which is likely your workplace, and, the security of all the other devices there, your children's, your spouses, anything else that's connected to your network, have become even more paramount in terms of the security of your organization where you work. So, let's see what I've got. All right, so this is basically stolen from Cisco. You can tell because of the blue boxes, but this is kind of the idea of what IT and security think of when they think of the network that they're in charge of securing. I mean, obviously, this is a two-dimensional image, so it's going to be flat regardless. But, even if you're thinking, lots of different sites and whatnot, it's still, the idea has always been, I think, in security, at least in, what I've seen in terms of, what we need to secure, what we need to test, where we need to put our security budget. It's always been very, very perimeter based. And that being, we need to control what's coming in and what's coming out of our network. So we put a lot of our security at that perimeter. We put our next gen firewalls, our intrusion detection, intrusion preventions, all those things at the perimeter, and perhaps maybe ignore is too strong a word, but tend to overlook a lot of the other things that come into play in a modern security environment. Certainly now when we're all working at home, but it's been, like I said, a problem for a long time, and we have likely all have our own phones. A lot of us are using our own laptops, so on and so forth. So, those are things that may never actually come into the security perimeter and yet are going to be handling potentially sensitive data, or they're going to leave the security perimeter and come back and potentially not be in a good state and now be able to access things inside the perimeter, leave again, with that data. Again, well, I have a slide for that. So reality, this is, aside from adding Zoom to this is actually a slide I've used for a long time, because again, this has been a problem for a long time, because this is just, this is not how we have worked in a really long time, unless you're in a very, very specific, environment where, it is all like that. But, as we've seen for years, productivity is very limited, in this environment. I mean, it was nice, looking back, and it's like, oh, you come home from work and then like you don't have to think about it again until 8 o'clock the next morning. But at least for me and everyone I know, that has not been how we worked for a really long time. We've gone to conference, we've gone to customer sites, we've gone on vacation and worked there anyway. We've often go to meetings at somebody else's site and had to bring up data from for like a demo or something. So I mean, our data and our security posture has long since left the perimeter. But again, in COVID-19, when we were all suddenly at home, a lot of people who did not really have a security plan for this, suddenly had to deal with it. So our reality is, indeed, we're not traveling now, but our work sites are now our homes, which, that's an airport, one would presume, but, we're not in the airport. We're probably not as much in the coffee shop either, but, we are in our homes, which, may or may not have the best security ever. As a security person, as a penetration tester, I like to say that my home security is the worst because I have tons of vulnerable devices on the network by design because I'm testing them. So there's all sorts of stuff. Or, I'm building a class and I've got, vulnerable systems that I created for my students to be able to, hack as beginner hackers just learning. And, they're live on my network, just hanging out. So yeah, I've definitely, even me, as a security person, over the years, I've had to, come up with ways to, have those insecurities live alongside, the necessary security of, working with customer data and, working with customers who, expect a certain level of security. And now that's true of just about any enterprise. It is now at home, and we have to somehow have some sort of security in the home when we've focused all our security on, our core network itself and its perimeter, whereas that is for many companies now just basically a data center at best. So, we've had cloud apps for a long time. Cloud apps are great. They are, great for productivity. You've always kind of had either we, roll our own email and then we have to secure it ourselves, which, has varying success, or, we get Microsoft or G Suite or something like that. And then we are, anytime we're using someone else's platform, we are relying on them for the security. And, we're hoping that they're doing all the right things because the cloud service out there, it's just a bunch of, boxes in the cloud. So, they could fall victim to, all the same security issues that we fall victim to in our own, both home and work scenarios, bad passwords, getting phished, not patching, when there's vulnerabilities. And of course, there's always the possibility of, 0-day vulnerabilities in any of that software. At this point, I feel like that's something we just have to accept is going to happen. We are far away from being able to create completely secure products that are, also useful to people. So, the idea of there being no security risk when using something is something I think is very far off, something I would hope that I'm going to be instrumental in the future making happen, but it's just not there. There is going to be risk. That's just the reality of things. We had risk when we were like this, plenty of enterprises were still getting popped. We certainly have risk like this. The difference being that, we still think like this in terms of when we're doing our risk management, in terms of when we're deciding where we're going to put our security budget, deciding, what we're going to buy. We are, I'm afraid, very much in IT and security, still very much thinking of the enterprise like this, when we now need to be thinking of it like this. A lot of the solutions that, make sense in a perimeter-based security definitely don't make a lot of sense now. And again, this is really nothing new. We have definitely been moving drastically in this direction for a long time. I mean, we've been using cloud apps for a long time. It didn't start with COVID-19. I had used Zoom for a long time and a lot of other platforms. I pick on Zoom because they're the ones that I guess are getting the biggest share of the market, but you can do meetings on G Suite or Microsoft Teams or any Skype, any other number of these as well, and we have been doing it for a long time. I mean, one of the great things to come out of COVID-19 is maybe we'll stop having to go downtown for meetings that we could have on Zoom and then not have to drive for an hour or even more. I hear you guys have even worse traffic than we do, so there's that. All right, so threat model. So this is a phone, but I mean, really, you can think of it as any, modern device, even a laptop. So, I mean, one of the things about these devices that, we don't really think about in terms of if they're just going to sit here is how mobile they are, hence the name mobile, I suppose. But, they do move around. They go to different places, perhaps not so much anymore in COVID-19, but, they are moving outside of, the network that is owned by security. They're probably on a home Wi-Fi. And for each of your employees being on a home Wi-Fi, you don't really know what the security of that Wi-Fi is, what the security of the other devices are. So really the threat model is all the things that are around it as well as the device itself. Whereas, in this sort of scenario, we can control the things that are around it to some extent. We can control the perimeter, but, it being moving around the world or being in someone's home that is not owned by the enterprise. I mean, unless the enterprise is going to show up and, redo everybody's network and throw off all the kids' laptops so they can't do their schoolwork anymore, throw off all the IoT devices that everybody's bought, throw off all your personal devices, or, do security assessments upon them. You're basically looking at, you need to treat every employee device as though it's in a zero trust environment, as well as the device itself being zero trust because it's likely owned by the employee or managed by the employee at least. So, you don't really know, what else they brought there. So, I mean, I have some examples on here. Malicious applications, certainly, we've tried, blacklisting, whitelisting, what have you, to try to make it so that there are not malicious applications on the devices. The carriers themselves, try their best. The app stores do a pretty good job, but I mean, it's certainly possible that there's going to be some malicious application on a device or on the network that is listening, and you have your employees doing potentially sensitive work in that environment. Certainly, devices being stolen, someone having unauthorized access to it. Phishing is a big deal. It's been a big deal for a long time. We've mainly focused on email, but, with the advent of these devices, there are myriad other ways people can be phished, which we will talk about in a little bit. All the ways they are connected. So, these things have a lot of connections. So, I mean, the laptop has Bluetooth on it. The phone has near field communication, Bluetooth, all sorts of different things. They also hook up, to the mobile carrier, to the Wi-Fi probably at home instead of the corporate Wi-Fi. You may be using a VPN, but nonetheless, what about the data that's going out, say, through the mobile carrier? So there's lots of different connections, and we don't control them. So that's where that perimeter-based security is really falling down right now, because, the devices are not inside the perimeter at all now. So, we're not really able to, with a perimeter-based model, we're not able to do anything in terms of monitoring that in and out connection because, at best, we're VPNing in, but, what happens the rest of the time? And, that's just one device. The ecosystem that comes with the device, I've mentioned, the rest of the network, your spouse and your kids' devices, the IoT devices in your smart home, your neighbors who might have, cracked your Wi-Fi password, because that happens. So, you've got all that as well, but just talking in terms of a single device, they're perhaps unprecedentedly hooked up to the cloud themselves, without the user really having to do anything. There's tons of other devices that come with, the single employee-owned device. You think of all the ways, the cellular infrastructure itself, the Wi-Fi network, the home Wi-Fi network is hooked up to, whoever their vendor is. And, they've got boxes in the cloud that might be missing patches or have bad passwords, or they might have employees who get phished. They fall potentially to the same security issues that the rest of us do. Same with the cellular infrastructure. I mean, that signal goes out to some antenna somewhere, but it does go out to, a bunch of boxes that are in the cloud that are owned by the cellular network that employee uses. Security, question mark. And then, we've got, any of our enterprise setups that we have. I mean, a lot of people already had enterprise mobility management, mobile device management, lots of different stuff for productivity, for mobility. Again, COVID-19 has just really brought this to the forefront. It's not anything that hasn't long since been a problem. I mean, most enterprises had bring your own device. Most enterprises had employees that were working from home or working from a client site or working from the airplane or working from the coffee shop, long before COVID-19 hit. It just, like I said, has kind of brought it to the forefront. So any of these, enterprise services that we use, if we have enterprise mobility management, again, we're relying on the security of, the back-end infrastructure of that vendor. And same thing for, if we're using email, file share, our app stores, if we have a corporate app store, things like that. I mean, they're all basically somebody else's problem in terms of security and risk that we have to accept. So, we're, I guess, unprecedentedly vulnerable right now. And really, I think, have to start thinking about things a little differently. Zoom. Okay. I've heard that in India that the Brady Bunch was huge. When I first got this picture, I was like, but this is for India. Did they even watch the Brady Bunch? But I've heard that you guys really love the Brady Bunch. So, the Brady Bunch intro, and it's basically Zoom, right? So Alice just needs to turn on her camera, and all the problems we're all having on Zoom, even being really technical people and having used Zoom. I've used Zoom and the other ones for meetings forever. I hate to drive, so if I can do it online, yes. But, it seems like every single conference call, somebody's having some sort of problem. So, yeah. But, like I said, I'm picking on Zoom just because, they're the ones that are getting, I guess, the most press and the most market share. I mean, certainly Zoom made a lot of money and had a lot of customers before this, but, it certainly has been a good time in the market for them, but perhaps not a great time in the market for security for them. So actually, I'm going to read this because I got some statistics for this. So according to Gallup, in March of 2020, in just 2 weeks, we went from 31% of Americans working from home. So that's already a pretty big number. The fact that we weren't really thinking too much about security outside of the perimeter when we already had 31% of people working remotely is kind of sad. But it went up to 62% in just 2 weeks, when the lockdown started here in the US. And 78% of Americans were suddenly learning from home. So, people, in school. It's been certainly interesting to watch, the teaching industry, because I've taught online for ages, right? I've done remote classes online, and, suddenly seeing our elementary school teachers kind of run into the same issues that I ran into ages ago and trying to adapt to it has certainly been very interesting. And for Zoom, it was very much a Charles Dickens moment. It was the best of times, certainly, because wow, their stock went up, a gazillion percent. So it went a low of $62 to a high of $588 a share. So certainly it was the best of times, but it was also the worst of times because, suddenly they were getting a lot more scrutiny, as one does. But I mean, this is really just, having a startup myself, I understand, even being a security startup, I understand why this happens because, you got to get your product out, and people are much more interested in features and things working than they are on security. Even security people, let's admit it, we just want the thing to work. We'll think about security later. But, having security suddenly become to the forefront here has been interesting. So it's been a really relentless drumbeat of privacy and security issues for Zoom, which is not surprising. I mean, I think if any app went from, kind of what it was to being as big as it was as quickly as it did, that would be likely to happen. Certainly, Zoom probably should have taken more security precautions, done more security testing, had more security oversight way before this happened. But let's be honest, that's pretty much par for the course. Again, I'm picking on Zoom. This would be true of anybody. I think anybody who found themselves in Zoom's position would have basically been in the same position, because suddenly you had, I mean, really it comes down to, I think, a lot of people, they want to be in the news in the security. So, they all just start attacking Zoom because, if you can find something in Zoom, you'll be on the front page of CNN or whatever. So, they were suddenly getting a lot more oversight than they would have before. It would have just been, somebody's pet project before. Now it's, the entire security industry's favorite project. So I'm not saying that Zoom is any worse than anybody else. Like I said, I think this would have happened to anybody who found themselves in this position. That, what has happened with Zoom in terms of what we've seen in security is, I think, pretty much par for the course, and doesn't say anything about Zoom, but rather says things about, how we're doing in security right now. I mean, this was an app that was already, well adopted, that, people were already having, conversations on it and sending data on it that needed to be secured, and they were making assumptions about that security, and Zoom was perhaps, making promises about that security that weren't necessarily true or, even plausible. I mean, everybody you talk to, yeah, definitely no vulnerabilities. You have to say that, right? Because everybody else does. It's a problem. All of your competitors say, oh yeah, we use the best security. We're super secure. We definitely don't have any security vulnerabilities. We're the best at security. But if you're honest and be like, well, I mean, everything has security vulnerabilities. We've done some security oversight, but it's totally possible that, we've done our cryptography completely wrong and we just don't know it yet, or something like that. I mean, you can't say that, even though it's true of everybody. So, there's been, relentless drumbeat of security issues against Zoom. Some of them were simple fixes like assigning passwords, the fact that, people have just been able to drop in on the Zooms, and we saw very early on, a lot of attacks on Zoom, and, just making it a default that you have to have a password. Kind of seems like something we should have really done a long time ago, but, security is hard. Or limiting what participants could come in, authentication and authorization. I mean, there were some 0 days. There's continually, I think, gonna be 0 days. I mean, I really don't think at this point, like I said, we're at a point where we can stop that from happening. There's gonna be vulnerabilities in the software that you use. The main thing is that, getting them patched, keeping everybody up to date on the latest version, and the vendors dealing with these issues as they come to light very quickly, which Zoom seems to have done a pretty good job on that. So, like I said, it's not really that different than any other system. It's more indicative of, what we're dealing with in terms of security. Everything's vulnerable. Nothing has as much security oversight as it should. Everybody makes a lot of security promises, even security companies. Security companies may be the worst in terms of, if you install this box on your network, or you put this app on your device, all your security problems will go away. That is like everybody's marketing scheme. You go to go to a conference now, but you go down the rows of vendors at the conference, and they all are telling you the same thing. This will fix all your problems, but that's just not reality. So I think I think it's been interesting to see a lot of the world just kind of wake up to that. It's like, why is this stuff not more secure? Well, because you haven't required it to be more secure, because you've continued to use it even though it's not secure. And that's just kind of where we're at, I guess. So the security industry is due for a wake-up call. I think COVID-19 has given us some of one, and made us think differently. But really, it's gonna have to be the end users who are gonna have to expect more, gonna have to stop buying this crap that doesn't do its job. and insist upon better security, or, people are going to have to stop using, something like Zoom. But, we have to use something and they're all just as terrible. So what are we going to do? What a disaster. What a time to be alive in security. It's scary, but it's also great. It gives us this opportunity to really, I think, maybe make a shift and really make the world more secure. Whereas, if I go back to my first slide, I swear we have, everybody I work with, everything that they buy, it's all about perimeter security. It's all about the old enterprise. And COVID-19 did not make the new enterprise. I mean, think about it. I've said it a couple times in this talk, and I should stop repeating myself, but we have been using our own devices, working remotely, taking corporate data out of the corporate enterprise, having boxes online, using, cloud apps that are owned by somebody else and have, less or more security insight into, what's going on with them for a long time. This isn't new. Social engineering, I mentioned I would talk about this. So social engineering is huge. Social engineering is like the number one cause of all the problems in the security world. People are clicking on stuff. I'm clicking on stuff. They got me. They did. It was on my phone, though. They sent me a text. I was waiting for a very important package, and I got a text message that said it was from United States Postal Service saying, that they needed like a signature to deliver my package, which is reasonable. It happens. I have actually gotten text messages from them before because I've signed up for it, but it was actually a fish, and I totally clicked on it, and it was bad. Well, it wasn't really bad. I mean, I just cleaned up the mess. But, yeah, I mean, it happens. I mean, really, they just wanted me to log in, and I didn't. I noticed it before then. But, I mean, people click on stuff. But our security awareness training is, one, very focused on you're sitting in a desk at an office in an enterprise with enterprise security perimeter around you, and not focused on, the real way that we work before and after COVID. And it's also very, very focused on email. Email phishing is absolutely still a problem. It gets people all the time, but that's not the only way that people are being targeted. I mentioned text message got me. Text message has always been a special friend of mine when it comes to security. My first security research, my first talk ages ago was actually about SMS botnets. So it's always been a friend of mine. We've also got apps, especially the, secure apps like WhatsApp and Telegram. I mean, any way that you can send somebody a link to get them to click on it, that is a potential way to be phished. And I think their own security awareness kind of drops down because they're like, okay, this app is secure. It says it's secure. It says it on the manual that it's secure. So they're taking care of security for me, so I don't really have to worry about security, which I think is a fairly normal response to something like that. And but yeah, that's not really the case. Certainly, if somebody can get you to click a link in WhatsApp and it opens in the mobile browser, suddenly, you're not dealing with WhatsApp security anymore. You're now just in your mobile browser with, any security vulnerabilities that may be present, anything they might get you to download, any credentials they might get you to put in. I mean, I've got some other examples on here, near field communication, Bluetooth, QR codes are always fun. So yeah, I mean, social engineering is big. It's been big for forever. It's just going to get bigger, but we in security really need to, I think, wake up to the fact that it's not just email. And security awareness training is good. We should keep doing it, but it's not a panacea. We really need to be doing more, and we need to be doing more outside of just, teaching people about email. We've got to be teaching them about all the ways they might be targeted. And I really do believe in phishing simulations. And I believe in them not just for email and using things like text message, or putting up a QR code. I mean, I've done these things with my clients, put up a QR code for the restaurant downstairs and, get them to download the app for the restaurant, but it's really my app, just like an attacker might. And, the results are somewhat interesting. So what can we do about this? I can't just be all doom and gloom, security is terrible, the world is ending. So, our problem is indeed that we have focused too much on the perimeter, and I'm probably running out of time. I don't even know how long this thing is supposed to be. No, I've got time. So, we've got things that we do in terms of, security, and, some of them have been with varying success able to move into, our COVID-19 life, which was, as I've mentioned a couple times, it was really our corporate life already. And I think that, we're going to have to do a bit more, but, let's talk about it. The main thing being, I had the list here, you've probably got some of these: mobile device management, enterprise mobility management, mobile application management, system isolation. System isolation is very much dead at this point. The idea that, it's just isolated on your corporate network, it's probably not now. It's at home, it's talking to everybody else, it's a disaster. So, even if you sent somebody a corporate laptop or a corporate phone, they're now likely controlling it, and it is interacting with the rest of the home network or anywhere else they might be taking it, which it was probably doing already, let's be honest. But, that's that. But, the main thing being, we really have got to focus on the endpoint itself. But the problem with endpoint protection is it kind of assumes a good state to start with, which I mentioned a couple times. We kind of need to be zero trust about this. If you build an app, make the assumption that the device that it is on is already compromised. So, if you're Zoom, assume that the computer or phone that it's on is compromised. There is an attacker on there. They have high-level privileges, and they are after what is in your app. And that's how we should be thinking about security. And, if you're enterprise and these are your employees and they've got corporate data, they're using corporate apps, they're, even just take corporate email, for instance, they're getting email that's got sensitive data in it, theoretically, point to point, it's good, it's got the good security in transit, it's getting from point A to point B securely, we'll make that assumption, even though it's probably a bad one. But once it's on the user's device and it's decrypted and they're reading it, what is then potentially attacking it? Or even, once it enters the home network, even, what's attacking it then? So, certainly, endpoint protection has always gotten a really bad rap because it's just been synonymous with antivirus, and antivirus has always gotten a really bad rap, which I think is somewhat unfair. Antivirus... Yes, antivirus is not going to solve all your problems, but neither is anything else that says it's going to. Antivirus does what it's actually supposed to do pretty well. Antivirus, will find, like my mom really likes to download internet games, like seriously, and oftentimes they come with, something a little extra in the form of a virus. It does typical, like, dumb virus things, like turn off antivirus and put up a lot of pop-ups and generally make the system work like crap, like bad viruses do. Really, advanced persistent threat type things, you wouldn't even know it was happening. Antivirus is not going to find stuff like that, but antivirus is pretty good at, it pops up and notices when my mom downloads something with something extra. And I am not picking on mothers here. My mother has a PhD in computer science. She's actually really smart. But, we like to use our computers the way we like to use them. And, she always cleans it up when she makes a mess of the computer. Or if she doesn't, then I do. But, yeah, anyway. So antivirus actually does its job of finding, like, the script kiddie type viruses pretty well when you download them, and that's what it's supposed to do. But it gets a bad rap because people, I guess, expect it to find your advanced persistent threats, your rootkits, your things like that. And your typical application layer antivirus, it can't even see that far, particularly in mobile devices. The early antiviruses were all just basically able to scan themselves because of the sandbox. All applications were sandboxed, so it could look at, like, the APK when it first came down, but all you had to do was, like, download your malware after installation, and the security apps couldn't see it because they can't see into that sandbox. So we have to have the endpoint protection at a lower layer, if you will, like, built into the operating system of the device. And we really are starting to see, I moaned and groaned about this for a really long time, but we really are starting to see, some real movement in that area. The operating systems of the devices, they have opened up, APIs and built in a lot of security, but that comes with its own things. What happens when a malicious application pretending to be endpoint protection, gets access to, administrator mode, or gets into the operating system, through these channels that have been made available for security apps. That causes its own problem. But certainly we have to start thinking about things as, not, this is the flat perimeter. What happens inside is its own problem. And as long as nothing bad happens in or out at our firewall, everything's good, because, that's just not how it works anymore. And so we've got to actually, protect the devices themselves, while also, like I said, I'm almost contradicting myself, because security is just in that weird of a state right now that we have to assume that the device is compromised, but we also need to protect the device, even though it's possibly already compromised, which is not an easy question to solve. But I think that's, where we need to be putting our thought, certainly into zero trust nothing, but also into, okay, so we're in a zero trust environment, everything is compromised, what can we do to make our data secure even when it's under active attack on the device that is on right now? And I think that's really where we need to be, putting our time and money right now, which is mostly a shift, because even, enterprise mobility managements and things like that were really, they had an app on the device, but they were really a cloud box, and, it was really, watching traffic and things like that. So, yeah, it's, even within the mobile security realm, it's going to be something of a paradigm shift, I think, in order to get this right. But what's really missing, I think, I guess I can tell you guys this, I'm going to get out of the pen testing business, I swear. Because it's just so depressing. I gotta get the second edition of the book out, and then, finish all the pen tests I have to do. But what we're really missing in the world is security assessment. And, for so long, I've kind of been in this weird chasm of, on the one hand, the research I do is in mobile and IoT security. The products that I build in my startup are for mobile and IoT security testing. And then, in my consulting life, where I'm working, with customers doing pen tests and things like that, it was always very much, okay, test the web application, test the internal environment, test the Wi-Fi. The mobility was really just overlooked, and still is, unfortunately. It was kind of like, oh, we can't test people's devices. We'll just assume that's okay. But, we all know attackers don't do that. And, that's, I think, where we've really seen this fall short, as we moved into COVID-19. And even before that, since we had basically been in this paradigm anyway, is that, we've really been ignoring security testing when it comes to, if somebody builds a mobile app, they're going to get that security tested, hopefully. I do a fair amount of that, in my day job, testing people's mobile applications. But, again, I think it's often really overlooked, it might be in a hostile environment to begin with. When I do mobile app security testing, I think about it from, okay, the device is compromised, how's it going to get at that app? As opposed to, just like, is an attacker going to be able to, exploit this app if they're there, kind of thing. So I think, we've done security testing there. Well, some people have, but we've really ignored, what is the security implication of a compromised mobile device or somebody's own laptop being compromised at home? What is the risk to our organization if somebody's smart TV is compromised and it's on the same network and suddenly starts attacking other devices on the network, and you've got what are essentially corporate assets but are owned by the employee on that network? And so I really, I say I'm getting out of the pen testing business. I'm not really. That was a joke. I really think pen testing is important. Security assessment is important. Risk management is important. I would really like to see the world get more secure, and I've always been very anti not anti is the wrong word. I've not been anti preventative technologies like enterprise mobility management or antivirus or anything. What I'm against is how they market themselves, which I talked about previously, that, if you install this, it'll make all your security problems go away, because we are so far away from that. And like I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to totally pivot my entire life, and I'm going to build preventative technologies that actually do secure things, actually do a good job. But, like I said, I got to finish my book first. I got to finish this talk first. They've only wanted this thing for like 3 weeks. It's an interesting time to be a security person. I have so much work. Everyone around me is like, oh, unemployment. What are we going to do for food? And I'm like, man, I've got so much work to do. I don't know how I'm going to survive. So first world problems indeed is where we're at in security, that we just have so much disaster we have to deal with that, yeah, so there's that. But anyway, I have gone very tangential. It is very hard to record a talk and do it seriously when you're like sitting at home in your bathrobe. Like, I feel like I'm just talking. So I hope you guys like just talking, because that's what you get, because this has gone on a million tangents. Love me anyways. I've been busy working on that new book for you. So we really need to do risk assessment and monitoring, at the endpoint level, at all the endpoints, not just the ones that are sitting in the enterprise, which, like I said, are now basically data center assets in most cases. But, the actual devices that people are using, and in the actual environments that they're using them, and in the actual connections that they're using. I mean, for a long time, we've really only focused on, Wi-Fi and the wired connection in terms of, monitoring traffic. But, if stuff is being attacked or sending out data potentially through like Bluetooth or the mobile modem, near field communication, any other way that these guys communicate, I mean, Zigbee, things like that. I mean, certainly the attacker would have to be somewhere around. But what it could be like, my phone is compromised, it's attacking over Bluetooth to my laptop, my laptop's sending data out to my phone throws it out over the, say, the mobile modem, and then, it's gone. And, not, even if we were using the VPN to, secure the Wi-Fi, and it was a good VPN and it did its job, nothing saw that happen, and it's gone, and it happened. And I think we've been very reactionary in security in that, we'd say that, oh, this obviously isn't happening because, it's not on like the Verizon data breach report. And it's like, well, is anybody actually looking? Is anybody monitoring this happening? Well, no. So how do you know it's not happening? Because you haven't seen it when you're not looking? Bad. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at in security. So definitely we need to be monitoring like everything. We need to, this idea that we can't test or monitor our employees' personally owned devices or their own networks, that just has to be dead. That can't be true anymore. Privacy is dead. We've seen that privacy is dead. So, embrace it. Privacy is dead. You absolutely are going to have to start spying on your employees if you're not already, if you want to do security well. So yeah, we definitely need to do more testing of the right things, more testing of actual real scenarios. I mean, that's great that like, somebody tested your web app or somebody tested your corporate firewall. That's awesome. Absolutely do that. But it's only one piece of the puzzle. You're not really getting your actual security unless you're testing everything. You're actually simulating like real attacker on real device, and that could actually happen to you. And yeah, and you need to do it a lot. Like, you need to do it constantly, like constant security testing, constant security monitoring, constant security simulation. And certainly this won't make all the risks go away, but it'll certainly help. I think we've really had our head in the sand for a really long time about this, and we can't anymore. And yeah, so that's what I've got to say about that. And I think they gave me some closing arguments. So, build your security into everything. Assume zero trust. Assume that what you're running on is compromised. Assume that your employee devices are potentially compromised or will become compromised at some point. Teach your employees security awareness, not just about email. teach them about, other ways that they can be targeted and likely are already being targeted. Do the basics, things like patching, password security, phishing. These really are, those three there are really the basis for so many of the attacks that are successful. There's always going to be 0 days, at least until I solve the 0 day problem completely with my preventative technology work that I'm going to go do when I finally get caught up with the work I already have to do. But so many of the attacks are not. The attackers don't have to work that hard. It's missing patches, phishing, and bad passwords that will, put you head and shoulders above so many of your competitors. So, but that means something different than it meant before, right? Because now it means, it's got to be patching people's own laptops and own phones. It's got to be them using good passwords on those, and it's got to be them not getting phished on their own devices. So again, going back to the very, very beginning, this doesn't work. So we're going to have to do something about that. All right, now I'm pretty sure that 10 years into mobility, I never update how long that is. It's probably like 13 now. Has security caught up? Absolutely not. Here's some contact information for me. I've probably gone over the time, hopefully not by very much. Thank you guys for your time and patience. I really hope that this COVID-19 stuff works itself out so I can actually come visit you guys sometime. You've been on my list for a really long time, and yeah, thanks for